Hello, folks. Welcome to another edition of Creator News Live. So excited that you are here. This is going to be a fun show because this is one of my favorite topics of podcasting and video podcasting, all this stuff. I met Darrell. I've heard of Darrell for a long time because it's hard not to be in podcasting and not know who Darrell is. But we, I think, hooked up at, we talked a little bit at Podcast Movement. I think that's where we hung out in Dallas. So that was fun. Always good to hang out with fellow podcasters, and we've kind of been chatting a little bit beforehand, but this is going to be fun. So we're talking about how to not burn out and have a sustainable podcast. So if you're listening today, make sure you ask your questions down below wherever you're watching from, because we want to make the show all about you. Darrell, thank you so much for joining the show today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. I loved chatting with you at Podcast Movement. We had a good time chatting and sharing some food together, and
That's right.
Those are always great combinations. And so excited to be chatting with you today and interacting with your audience.
It was hard because we ate with Lou Mangello, and he tends to steal everybody's fries. So you got to be careful around Lou, but it'll be good. We've got our friend Dustin saying, hey, good to see you, Dustin.
Hey, Dustin, good to see you.
For popping in. But I'm going to go ahead because I've got so much to talk about with Darrell. Connor Brown is, I don't know, off on a ship somewhere. He's doing something. He will be back hopefully soon. But I'm going to hit go on the podcast machine, and we will get started. Hello, folks. Welcome to Creator News Live. I'm Jeff C., and you're not. And this is the show that keeps you up to date on what's happening in the creator economy and so much more. Have you guys ever struggled to keep your podcast consistent week after week? Maybe you've wondered how some creators manage to stay organized, sound professional, and actually enjoy the process. Or maybe you felt the pressure of editing, publishing, and promoting while trying to keep your sanity intact. If that sounds familiar, you're going to love this episode because today we're joined by Darrell Darnell, the founder of Pro Podcast Solutions and a seasoned producer who's helped hundreds of podcasters simplify their workflow and create shows that last. Darrell's going to share the strategies, systems, and mindset shifts that make podcasting sustainable without burning out. So sit back, clear your schedule, clear your mind, and get ready for this week's episode of Creator News Live. Darrell, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing so good. It is such an honor to be chatting with you, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, so as always, we have been doing this for the past couple months now. We've got a special intro for Darrell, so I'm going to go ahead and hit go, and here we go.
It's Darrell Darnell today, helping you podcast the smarter way. No burnout, just press play. It's Darrell Darnell today.
So there you go, Darrell, your very own theme song.
I need to get that so I can use it as my bumper when I take the stage at a podcast conference. Or something like that.
Sure. It's a lot of fun. And if you notice, I played a little bit for you guys listening. There's a I tell you, folks, AI continues to get amazingly better. We've got some of our friends already showing up today. We've got Dustin, of course, here. Megan Powers, good to see you. She's really struggling with getting shows recorded lately, so this is going to be a great show for Megan. Megan, thank you for stopping in. And Dustin says, the fire. And Tater from But Mostly Disney is saying, what's up, guys? Thank you guys for showing up today. Well, we're going to go ahead and just jump right in, and we're going to talk about Darrell has kind of some cool things that he does. If you don't know, we kind of mentioned before, but he is the founder of Pro Podcast Solutions, a leading podcast production company. He launched in 2013. So we're going to be talking about all his experience, how he's helped these podcasters throughout the years, because he's got some systems and some things. And I want to make sure, Darrell, that we give time to let people know about your download that you sent me, which is the kind of the freebie that you have, which is amazing. Like it is so good on helping you plan out a podcast. And there's two things. You even have a Google spreadsheet. So we'll make sure to list that down in the show notes, and we'll mention that towards the end of the show. But Darrell, you have kind of an interesting background, but you've built podcasts around like The Fringe, Stranger Things, and The Twilight Zone, which I think is so stinking cool. So what drew you to make these fan or like media-based podcasts in the first place?
Well, those were how I got into podcasting. So I was a huge fan of the TV show Lost that was on ABC and
Mm-hmm.
was on message boards and chat rooms, interacting with other fans of the show. I had some friends at work, and we were all water cooling about the show, trying to figure out what in the world was going on. And in one of those message boards, somebody mentioned that there were podcasts about the show where people would do the same thing for an hour, just water cool about
Right.
the show. So I was like, I don't know what a podcast is. So I went to iTunes and I found some podcasts about Lost. And Lost also kind of turned me on to J.J. Abrams. I really wasn't familiar with his work prior to Lost. And when it was announced that his next project would be a show called Fringe, and it was premiering in the fall of 2008, some of my coworkers were like, let's do a podcast about that. And I just thought that was a great idea. It wasn't even my idea. It was, I think, Jason, one of my coworkers, it was his original idea. And Jason and Courtney and I just thought it was a great idea. So the three of us started, and we were listening to other podcasts about, they were really into World of Warcraft. And so they were listening to some of those podcasts. And so we kind of drew inspiration from all of our favorite podcasts on how we would structure it, what segments we would have. And so we launched that podcast in the fall of 2008. And that really ignited this passion for, TV, sci-fi, nerdy podcasts. That water cooler piece of it is really, really fun. The theorizing and, getting stuff wrong and getting laughed at and all the things that come along with being a TV podcaster. So, but that's how I got the start, was really just nerding out about Lost and then following that, what seemed like the natural evolution from there.
That's awesome. I want to ask the audience who's listening or watching, like, what is the first podcast that ever really got you hooked? Like, it's maybe the one that made you think, I want to start my own. So I want you to drop it in the comments wherever you're watching from. You mentioned Lost. I think, Cliff Ravenscraft, that was the first, I remember thinking of a TV show based podcast that I remember. But Fringe has been, gosh, that has been, it's still going on. Like, how many years have you been doing the Fringe podcast now?
Well, we did the original run of the Fringe podcast from 2008 until 2013. The show wrapped in January of 2013. And then we just kept doing other podcasts throughout the years. Mm-hmm. And fans of the show and fans of the podcast would hit us up pretty regularly. Hey, you ever thought about doing a rewatch podcast? And I knew that the day would come when it felt right to do a rewatch podcast, but you also have to give the show some time to have ended before a rewatch really feels like it's appropriate. And so I don't remember what year it was. It was probably 2001, if I had to guess. We said, let's do it. And it was a different co-host. I reached out to my original co-host, and he was like, I'll join you for an episode, but my podcasting days are done. And so he did. He joined us for a single episode and had a great time with him. But one of our listeners from the original show is my co-host for it. And so we're just about ready to wrap up season 4. We're almost done with the rewatch. And that'll probably be it for Fringe. I feel like twice is probably enough to cover the show in in-depth detail. But we had a break there between the Fringe podcast and then the Fringe podcast rewatch, which is the current one.
Well, just a little side note, our friend Lou Mangello, he's a big Fringe nerd. In fact, in my presentation, I have kind of like name this tune, and I have a list of like 25 songs that I play, and Fringe was one of them, and nobody usually gets that. But of course, Lou did, so he's the one who got that one. So
that's great.
It does have a very cool theme song, but it is an incredible show. I'm a big J.J. Abrams fan, so I really enjoy it.
He wrote the theme song to Fringe.
Yeah. So it's such a good show. I'm gonna have to rewatch it. I'm gonna go back and listen to all your rewatch and watch it and really nerd out about this one. Now you have another podcast, so I think you have like 4 total, correct?
Yep,
like that you do. Like I know you produce a lot, but that you do. The stuff I learned yesterday, that feels like really deep and personal and kind of reflective. They're not super long episodes, but what inspired that project, and how does that like fit alongside your more entertainment focused shows?
That's a really good observation. Good question. I remember I think it was like 2012 or so. Fringe was still going on. And I loved Fringe, and I loved talking about the subject matter of Fringe. Sci-fi lends itself to have some really tangential conversations. Star Trek was great at this. You can talk about race issues of the day because we're talking about space creatures, not human race issues. And and sci-fi itself overall kind of lends itself to having those really wonderful conversations, whether it be about social issues or even religion and those things that you're not supposed to, politics that you're not supposed to talk about.
Mhm.
Um, and I reached this stage where I was like, I want more of this, that I don't have to rely on the content of an episode to springboard me into these conversations. Not necessarily the political stuff. I don't really enjoy talking about that stuff,
Right.
but some of the stuff I do. And so I began kind of searching within, like, what does this look like? And I was at New Media Expo
Oh yeah.
in Las Vegas, and I was sitting in a session, and I had this idea burst within me. And so I remember leaving the session quickly, trying to find a quiet place in a hotel casino, and finding this bench next to this side door. And this idea came to me called Things I Learned Yesterday. And it would be just kind of reflecting on the everyday moments of life that get past you if you're not careful, but have some really practical application if you'll take a moment to notice.
Mhm.
And in that moment, I kid you not, I'm sitting here trying to find by the domain name. Things I Learned Yesterday has already been taken. And it was later that day that I came up with Stuff I Learned Yesterday, and that one was available, and I took
Right.
it. I like Stuff I Learned Yesterday better anyway, on second thought.
Yeah.
But I'm sitting there on that bench, and this worker from the hotel walks by, and he's got one of those kind of dumpster on wheels for
Right.
trash that you
Right.
see and he, here's this guy hauling trash, which is not the dream job of anybody, let's be honest.
Right.
Smile on his face, whistling. He walks past me, his whistle catches my ear, and I look up, and he smiles and waves. And I'm a whistler too. I always used to annoy
Right.
my parents and people with my whistling.
Me too.
And so I just felt connected to this guy. And he goes out and empties his trash and comes back a few minutes later, still smiling and whistling. And I was just like, that's what I'm talking about. Those little everyday moments of life where there's a lesson there if you just open your eyes, pause, and ponder. And so the first episode was The Contagious Smile of the Garbage Whistler. That was the name of the first episode. And so that's kind of what the podcast is about. And there's I focus on I have 4 pillars. We might talk about pillars here in a little bit, but this was the podcast where I first came up with the idea of content pillars to help me manage content ideation and then the creation of the content. So, and I have a pillar for each week of the month. It's a weekly podcast. So the first week of the month is faith, where I talk about either misconceptions that the general population has about the Christian faith, or my own personal stories of the Christian faith. The second week is all about family, and so it's parenting or things that I had as learned as a kid, just those sorts of things. The third week is all about career, so it could be my entrepreneurial journey, lessons I've learned from that, or my nearly 20 years I spent in the corporate world. And then the fourth week is a wild card, where maybe there's something that crosses over between those pillars or doesn't squarely fit into a pillar. And so those go into that fourth week of the month. And then when there's a fifth week, it's open season, and I invite the listeners to send in their contributions. We call those Monday mailbags. So
very cool.
But that's how it kind of came about, and we're almost to episode 700 now. So it's been quite a journey. And not all of those are hosted by me. I brought in some co-hosts for a while to help me kind of bear that burden for a while, because I started as a 5-day-a-week podcast, and then went to 3 days a week, and now it's just weekly, which is where it should have been all along, probably. But
Right. So, and the subjects, we were even talking a little bit about the parenting. Like you talked about daughters. We both have daughters that are relatively the same age, and dealing with that.
Yep.
But there's some very personal stuff in those podcasts. Was that hard to do? I mean, did you come out of the gate like, I'm going to be really personal and very transparent, or did that kind of grow over time that you notice, okay, my audience really wants me to be more and more transparent, I'm going to kind of lean into that? Or has that the way you've always been doing your podcast?
I would say it's a little bit of both. There's definitely been a journey of what do I share, what don't I share? And even on some of those episodes, like I have an episode that's coming out later this year that I just wrote last week about my kids' first dating experiences. And so those, I try to be mindful and reach out to the kids for 2 purposes. Do I have my facts right?
Right.
And are you okay with what I'm sharing here? And do you have anything that you would like to add? And sometimes they're like, no, you got this wrong. Or sometimes they're like, yep, go for it. And so when I'm doing personal stuff with my kids like that, I try to get their permission. But we've when we first started the Fringe podcast back in 2008, it was like episode, I don't know, it feels like it was episode 4 or 5, where we started doing those in front of a live audience, just like we're doing right now. We were using Ustream back in those days, and we were had an IRC chat room, and we were always kind of doing it in front of a live studio audience, if you will. And that was just being raw, and all your flubs and miscues and wrong words and all the stuff that goes along with just doing things live kind of made me feel comfortable with just being who I am. And then as we've shared more episodes, and people like that episode you just mentioned about my daughter, Back Into the Oven is the name of that episode, and it talks about like sometimes you cook a batch of cookies and you got to put them back in the oven to get them right, and sometimes that's the way parenting can be. For me, that was just it was just an okay episode. Like it was good. It did all the things that a Stuff I Learned Yesterday episode needs to do. And yet when you and I got on the call today, we were just pre-chatting. That was the episode that you mentioned. And like I woke up that morning to a comment, a Facebook message from one of our listeners. She said, "Today's episode was brilliant." And I thought, oh. And then later on the day, I got another comment. And I got 3 comments in the first day. And that's just like personal comments.
Right.
It doesn't usually happen. Not like that. Like what I thought was just an average, checks all the boxes type of episode really connected with people in a really tangible way. And that's one thing about being a content creator. You never know.
Exactly.
You just have to keep creating. You just have to stick with it, because sometimes the content you think is great doesn't resonate with anybody. It was just good in your own mind. And sometimes the content you think is just mediocre really strikes a chord with people and touches them in a very tangible and practical way. So that was one that really surprised me how impactful it seemed to be on the audience.
Yeah, it's so funny. The things that you think aren't going to work, or vice versa. Like my daughter, she really wanted to do this. Like she's a big Scooby-Doo fan, and so she did this clip that's on Instagram, and I thought it's just silly. It's me, and she compares me to one of the villains, and she edited it really nicely, and it's doing really, really well. And I thought it was just a throwaway thing. I thought, I'll do it because it's something that she wanted to do, but it is, once again, she's way smarter than I am, and it worked really, really well. So it's funny how that stuff works. By the way, I forgot to mention, we've been talking about live video a little bit, but this show is also sponsored by our friends over at Ecamm. They are what makes this show possible. You can find out more about them at ecamm.com/Jeff. You can save 15% by using code Jeff15 for your first purchase. I love live video. You mentioned you back in the day, Uscreen. That's amazing technology. Google Plus was mine. That's where I met Dustin, who is in the audience as well. But it's a lot easier now with tools like Ecamm.
It really is. Yeah.
We've got some friends already showing up. We asked the question, like, what got you started podcasting, or what was the one that kind of got you really interested? And Megan says, I got invited to co-host a show on an AV production. That was her gateway to get into what she's doing now. And we've got our friend Gretchen saying, morning. Good to see you here, Gretchen, watching over on YouTube. So we mentioned your Stuff I Learned Yesterday podcast, but kind of one of the big things that you have is your own media company. Like you even have a podcast network, but Golden Spiral Media. Yep. When you started that, did you see that as a hobby, as a network that you were kind of going to put all these podcasts in, or a business opportunity, or did it just kind of like evolve naturally over time? I'm always interested in entrepreneurs' kind of origin stories.
It kind of evolved, and I have to give credit to Clint, who was my original co-host for the Fringe podcast. So we started out, I mentioned Courtney and Jason were my coworkers, and with Fringe's subject matter, we quickly realized, because we did a bunch of podcasts like before the show premiered, because Fringe was doing some online like ARG type of alternate reality game, interactive stuff for the fans. Lost did some of this, and Fringe was kind of trying some of that originally to promote and market the show before it started. So we were releasing podcast episodes before the show ever aired, and it became clear to us that we needed someone with a science background. And we again, thinking, do we know any scientists? And I was like, oh, as a matter of fact, I go to church with one. He's like got a master's degree in biochemistry and molecular biology. And
Wow.
so Clint became our fourth. And then eventually Courtney and Jason dropped out. So it was just Clint and I for like the last 3.5 seasons of the show. And he and I started doing some other podcasts. We did one about like, this was like way bleeding edge. We did this in 2009 or 2010. It was called Cutting the Cable, and it was about how to stream all the content. Like nowadays, streaming is everywhere, but it was in its infancy in those days. It was fairly short-lived. And then we did one called Dad Hacker, which was all about how to be it's all about dads and parenting. And that one was his idea, and he was leading that podcast. And like no sooner did we start it than his schedule changed, and we had to cut it. So I think we did 2 episodes of that. The same with we had one called Portable Orchard, which was all about Apple Mobile, and that one got nixed as well. But when we were in those stages of coming up with more podcasts, we decided we need to do a network. So he and I went to Starbucks one night, and I remember just sitting there for hours, just trying to come up with names and making sure the URL was available and all that. And then finally after hours, he was like, what about Golden Spiral Media? Because the Golden Spiral had been used in some of the pre-marketing of Fringe, and it's in the show throughout. Even in the final season, the Golden Spiral makes a very prominent appearance in the show. And so we thought that would be a way to always pay homage to how we got our start. Mm-hmm. And so that's how the name came about. And yeah, it was he always saw it as more of a business, and I always saw it as more of a just passion projects. And I'm glad he saw it the way that he did. I would have, my business skills weren't what they were, what they are today. And so we very much needed him as part of that visionary on that front. And then eventually, like I said, he stepped aside and he's not really actively involved in it anymore, but our roots are very much because of Clint and his vision.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the network, because this is a kind of a rabbit trail, but you've got quite a few podcasts in your Golden Spiral Media network. Do you ask people to come on your network? Do they approach you and you say, okay, here's how it works? Or do you say, okay, you're not ready for a network yet, you don't have enough downloads? Like, how does that application or growing the network happen?
Well, right now we're not in growth mode at all. We've kind of retracted a little bit. When we first started, a Golden Spiral Media podcast was a podcast that was hosted by either Clint or I, mostly both. Mm-hmm. And that was the way that we ran things for quite a while. After Clint stepped away, and then after I quit my corporate job, I had this grand vision to turn Golden Spiral Media into this massive TV fan podcast network. And so I started inviting specific people that I knew that were already experienced in that onto the network. And we had some really good success. But then my Pro Podcast Solutions, the business that pays the bills, started growing and taking more of my time. And as we had turnover on hosts, the quality standards didn't get communicated. That's on me. And, listeners over time, this is like over a few years of time, listeners started writing to me going, man, Golden Spiral Media is not what it used to be, or these new hosts you have are not whatever. Not all of them. Some of them are great. And, but it got difficult. And so I just made a decision as shows retire, because, a fan podcast, a TV show podcast gets canceled when the actual TV show gets canceled. That's them's the breaks, right?
Right.
And so as shows came to their natural conclusion, I just decided we're not going to expand anymore. And so now Golden Spiral Media is just a network that's it has podcasts hosted by me. And we may grow beyond that again at some point, but I felt for the time we needed to kind of pull it back and re-identify ourselves. And so it was a hard lesson to learn, because, for anyone who's thinking about a podcast network, you really do need to bear that in mind. All that comes along with managing the people and the quality across the board. And the further we went down, the further we got from shore, the more difficult that was to manage for me, and made some mistakes.
So let's go kind of the opposite direction, because I'd love your take on this, because I've had this happen to me. when you get approached to join a podcast network, what should you look at as a podcaster? Because, if you get growth and if you've been doing it for a long time, I'm assuming there'll be a lot of people asking to join it. We've had that a couple times with Guy's show, Guy Kawasaki's Remarkable People podcast. What do you look for our network, or when do you say, nah, that's not for me as a podcaster?
Well, I think there are a few critical questions to ask. I mean, is there alignment in philosophy, quality standards, the type of content that's being produced? Is there a common umbrella that makes sense, or uses some sort of random adjacent podcast that doesn't fit with the rest of the content? Or so those questions need to be asked. Is it a good fit and I'm assuming you've already got a podcast and you're being asked to join a network, that's the way it works most of the time. And then, there's usually some sort of revenue share that is in place. And that's just something that you've got to ask yourself. Are you comfortable with the revenue share and the way that revenue share is done, the percentage and, the timeline for getting paid and all the things that go into that? Or is that something? And then the big thing is ownership. If you're joining a podcast network, and if it's your existing podcast, then you need to retain ownership at the end of the day. If you're joining a podcast network to be to start a new show within that podcast network is probably going to own that content. You're coming on to create content for them. So there's a distinction there to be made as well. And so those are all things that you need to kind of make sure you're reading the fine print and having alignment in those areas. And if there's not alignment in any of those areas, then I would, step away and look for another opportunity, or perhaps start your own network. Who's to say?
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that. I won't mention the name, but it was a big, big company, and they were having a podcast network, big names on it. But when you joined it, like you said, the rights would kind of revert to them, and then they could actually replace you as the host of your own podcast. And I was like, wait, what? So yeah. That's kind of, you need to make sure that, if, like you said, there's alignment there, because it can get a little crazy in the fine print if you're not careful. It's really interesting. Before this show, I'm a big a friend of Dave Jackson, and I asked Dave. I said, "Well, I'm having Darrell on the show. What should I ask him?" And he goes, "I've never understood these media podcasts, because they seem like you always have to say spoiler alert before it, because you're talking about the show that just came out, and then it goes after there." So, I wanted to ask you, because many creators chase trends. That's kind of a thing on social media and marketing. But you've built these communities around these niche passions. So how do you think, and you mentioned that like when the show ends, that ends. Are you always looking for another show? But how does that approach contribute to sustainability? Like, to me, it's like you're kind of rolling the dice, because is it going to last longer than a season, or, what's going to happen when it's gone, and you put all this money and effort and time building a podcast. I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
If you're going to get into a fan podcast, that's TV or film related, like if you're a fan podcaster about your favorite sports team, that's a different story, right? The sports team is going to have a new season every year.
Right.
But when we're talking about TV and film fan podcasting, you really have to surrender yourself to the idea that your podcast is reliant on the content that you are following. And when that content dries up, so do you. And so
right.
when we first started, like the Fringe podcast, we knew Fringe was going to be coming to an end. It was lucky to get season 4. You could argue it was lucky to get season 3. It was very lucky to get season 4, and very fortunate to get season 5. And we knew going into season 5, it was going to be the end.
Right.
And so we were thinking, well, what do we do next? We don't want to lose our audience. We have this audience. They like us. We like them. We want to keep the ball rolling. And so before Fringe finished that fall of 2012, we started following another show that was on NBC. It was called Revolution. And we thought it was going to be the next thing. And we saw the pilot at San Diego Comic-Con that year. And so we put our stake in the ground, and we were going to follow that show. And I expected our audience to follow us with the new show. And it didn't happen. Like, our audience for the Revolution podcast was a fraction of what it was for the Fringe podcast. And that's that's, again, you're kind of hitching yourself to that wagon, and the popularity of the show is very much going to determine the popularity of your podcast. That's just the way it is. I've covered a lot of shows over the last decade plus, and my Stranger Things podcast is far and away the most popular podcast I've ever had.
Right.
We were sponsored by MeUndies last season 4, which was 3 years ago. But
right.
I remember when they reached out to us and asked, what our downloads were for, because we were basing it off a CPM model. We told them, our downloads are X, and we negotiated our contract based on that. And then, for reasons I have no control over, our audience doubled, almost tripled on some episodes of what it was that previous season.
Right.
I didn't do anything for that. That was all about the show's growth,
Right.
And that's just the way it is with TV podcasting. You are very much hitching yourself to the wagon of the networks, and you kind of have to surrender yourself to that reality. Having said that, you should be fostering a community that we have a core group of people that I could podcast about my toenails and they would somehow follow me for that content, right?
Yeah.
And that's based on relationships and community. And so you do have some control over that, but you also, like I said, you have to surrender yourself to knowing that some of it, maybe most of it, is out of your control when you're doing this type of genre podcast.
So I guess you kind of struck gold a little bit because of the delays with the seasons for Stranger Things, because it kind of drove people to, they're thirsty for content, and your show it's providing them that content and can nerd out about some of that stuff. So that turned out pretty well. So let's say you have a show, do you wait for it to come out for a season and then decide to start a podcast? Or did you start as soon as it hit, I'm going to start a podcast the day after the episode 1 goes out?
It's been all of the above. Okay. So with Fringe, I remember us seeing the teaser trailer that aired a few months before Fringe premiered, and us, Courtney, Jason, and I, the next day at work, we had all seen it and we were all excited. And so we made that decision well before we'd ever seen the pilot. Debris was another show that we decided on. It came out 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and it was done by the same showrunner that had done Fringe. Well, JJ started Fringe and then handed it off to a guy named Joel Wyman and Jeff Pinkner. And Joel was doing another show called Debris. And so we hitched our wagon to that. It was a great show, only lasted 1 season, and we were done. Stranger Things was the opposite. We had people from our community going, "Hey, there's this Netflix show that just popped up. You guys should be covering it." And I remember this is back when we had a lot of hosts on our network, right? It was in that stage of our network. And I remember reaching out to every host going, "Does anyone have the bandwidth to take on this show called Stranger Things?" And no one did.
Oh, man.
And so I think it dropped in either June or July of whatever year it premiered. And so in April or May, almost a year later, my daughter came to me and she says, "My friend and I want to start a podcast on this show called Stranger Things. Can we put it on the Golden Sprout Media Network?" And I'm like, "Only if quality standards are met, and you got to do this." And she's like, "Oh, no. I said, "I tell you what, kick your friend off, co-host it with me." and anyway, she wasn't keen on that at first, podcasting with my dad, because she's in middle school at this point. She's the same age as the actors are, the primary actors, the kid. And anyway, long story short, we started on the podcast just before season 2 dropped, and so we watched the whole first season, did an episode for each of those, and then we were ready to start with season 2 started. So we've been following the show actively since season 2. So it's been all across the board, with that.
I think it was at a podcasting conference. You had gone to some Stranger Things museum or something that you were going after the show or something.
We did there's a Stranger Things escape room.
Okay,
in
that was it.
Plano, Texas. And so we had a meetup with some of the listeners at a restaurant nearby, and played some Stranger Things trivia and just had a fun night doing that. And then we went over to the Stranger Things escape room and beat the crap out of that. So it was
that was great.
Yeah, we got the record time. We were like, "Oh yeah, that's right. No one's better than us."
That's cool. It's cool also that you activated your community, and I think that's one thing that podcasters really need to think about, especially with the world of AI and everything going on, is how can you activate your community and how can you draw them in? So that's very, very cool. I have one final question before we move on to this next section. Is that, like, looking back, what is something you learned from those early days of podcasting or editing or whatever that still shapes how you produce or teach podcasting today? What are some things that you can see looking back?
Well, I've mentioned it a little bit, but it's really community is the critical thing, especially in my field or my genre. Like I said, because we're shifting shows and we need an audience to connect with and do this with. It's a reciprocal relationship. We need them, they need us, and hopefully we're both getting a lot of meaningful kickback or connection through that. And I feel like we've done that. Like so you're a Fringe fan, there's a thing in Fringe called the White Tulip. And the White Tulip, there's an episode called White Tulip. And that show, or that episode, very impactful. And at the end of it, Walter, who's one of the characters, is asking God for a sign of forgiveness in a white tulip. And he gets it, spoiler alert, but not in a way that he expects. And that's all I'll say. But for the fandom, the White Tulip took on a different meaning. Like when the show had its final panel at San Diego Comic-Con, the fans that were at the front of the room, there was like this campaign to behind the scenes to get these white tulips printed out on paper. And so we all lifted up these white tulips, not as a sign of forgiveness, but as a sign of gratitude and love and appreciation. And they knew exactly what it. And so that white tulip has kind of taken on a different meaning within the fandom since then. And for us as our podcast, we've had several tragedies in our fandom almost immediately after the show wrapped, around death of parents or children or just things like that. And so it's come in two ways. Sometimes we've had the entire community get together and mail paper white tulips to someone. I've sent white tulip flowers to several funerals, and it's the community just reaching out and supporting each other. And so that's the biggest thing that I've learned is it's always about the people. I don't care if you're talking about TV shows or marketing, social media, it doesn't matter. Whatever podcast you have, it has to connect with a real tangible person. Like you were at a coffee shop having a one-on-one conversation, or, if you were at a conference and there were 100 or 1,000 people sitting there watching you, listening to you, that's the way you need to perceive that connection that you're making with a podcast. It's real people, and hopefully you're making real connections, because that's really the thing that matters most.
That's awesome. And I hope people who listen to and watch the show can see that there's a theme of community that weaves through everything we do. That's why I do live show, because I love seeing people in there. And in fact, like Rich's comment, he says the new show on Apple TV, this one, same time the show premiered this week, they did a podcast the same day that it came out. They're not stupid. Apple knows what's going on there. And then we've got Lou popping in, said Jeff and Darrell on one show. Christmas came early this year. Thanks, Lou.
Hey, Lou. It's so good to see.
And this is going to be a great question that we'll hit. But I want to know from you guys, for those of you who are already podcasting, what's been your biggest challenge in staying consistent with your show? So you've been doing this for a while. I mean, Lou has been around since like the dawn of time. Like, right. I think he was using, I don't know what he was using, a cup and a string to get to his people back in the day. But I want to know what you guys, what are you struggling with to stay consistent? I hear from a lot of podcasters. I know a lot of people who started one and stopped one. So what does it take to be consistent? So Darrell, this is a great question by Dustin as we kind of kick this section off. He goes, what would you say to someone who keeps getting told they should start a podcast but doesn't know where to start technically? He's asking for a friend. So I think you know enough people, Dustin, that can help you out with this. But
Dustin, I know a guy or two that could help you with that if so you're so inclined. So you mentioned the giveaway that we have, and so this is what I would recommend the people do if they're in a position like Dustin is. And that's download it's a PDF and an Excel spreadsheet that you get with it. It's a toolkit. And so the toolkit helps people kind of start with the basics. It's called our foundation toolkit. These are foundational things that every podcaster should be considering. You pour the foundation. If you don't have a good foundation, the house crumbles, right? So these are that important. It's 4 things, like, what is your unique selling product that is out there in your space? For us with Fringe, it was our scientist. We were the only podcast with a resident scientist that could tell us what was happening in the lab versus what was happening on the TV show. How fringe is that science that they're talking about on the show? And so what's going to make you unique? What's going to help you stand out against the other podcaster? Yes, you yourself are unique. You are different, but beyond that, what's going to be that thing that sets you apart? What's your core purpose? Why are you doing this? Are you doing it just because you like to talk and people like to listen to you? Not good enough. Let's get better than that. Why are you doing this? And that's your core purpose is going to sustain you on those dark days, lonely days, those things where you're not hearing from anybody, you're not seeing the growth that you don't want, you're facing burnout. That core purpose should be something that is powerful enough to keep you going through those difficult times. Identifying your ideal listener is also a part of that, so that you can connect with them. And people make the mistake of saying, well, I just want to talk to everybody about everything. I want to be like Joe Rogan.
Right.
Those are the unicorns. And so probably need to, narrow that down a little bit so you can know exactly what their needs are. Where are they at? And that comes into and I mentioned pillars earlier, and that's the other thing that's in this toolkit is those 4 pillars. And I gave an example of how I use pillars. I was talking with a client earlier this week, and she's in the fitness space, and specifically in the space where you have a clinic or a facility where people can come in and do different types of fitness. I'm being vague on purpose, but and so her pillars might be, so her audience is people who are running those shops, not the people who are signing up for the lessons. And that's an important distinction on who you're now creating content for. And so by understanding that her core listener is someone who's trying to run a fitness business, now her pillars look something like helping them understand how to run a business. Because maybe they were really passionate about fitness, and they have people who are like, hey, I'll partner up with you and do this together. You can teach me. But they don't know how to run a business. We have a lot of dental podcasts. And we've heard this over and over again. I graduated dental school knowing how to fix teeth, but not knowing how to run a business. And so, for our dental podcast, often one of their pillars is educating people on how to run a business. Going back to the fitness, another pillar for her is helping people develop teaching skills, how to market their business, just different things like that. So you can kind of, once you have that ideal listener in place, then you can start understanding where are they in their life? What type of help do they need? And now we can develop content pillars around that. And once you have content pillars in place, now you can sit down and go, okay, one of my content pillars is helping them understand how to run a business. What would episodes around that look like? Or maybe how to come up with a P&L, or maybe loan strategies, or like I said, maybe marketing techniques, or just different things like that that go into running a business. And you can start just ideating around to create ideas around that single pillar. Before you know it, you take a single pillar, you've got 10, 15 ideas around that single pillar by just taking 30 minutes to an hour to ideate. Then you come into the next pillar, and after you finish your 4 pillars, if you've done 10 or 15 episodes around each pillar, you've got a year's worth of content right there. And now the content creation process just got a lot faster. You just opened up yourself on the freeway to generate content.
Yeah. So Justin just asked this question, but it's amazing guide. You can find it at propodcastsolutions.com/creator. So propodcastsolutions.com/creator. I downloaded it. It's amazing. And even there's the Google Sheet that you'll get when he sends you the email after you sign up for it, which actually has like workflows and how to put stuff in. I mean, it just really walks you through the entire process. So It's one of the best ones I've seen for podcasters out there. So propodcastsolutions.com/creator. So go check that out. One of the questions that I have is, this is from Rich. I want to bring up Rich's comments first. Well, Lou said he started podcasting around a campfire in a cave. So back in the day, I'm surprised they had fire back then.
A rock, probably. Yeah.
Yeah. But Rich says, I sometimes have a hard time finding things to comment about. He does a show based on things that happens in his industry. He does a lot of promotional products like the cups and like, stuff like for Ecamm's Creator Camp, stuff like that. But those kind of products. So he struggles with finding those. Like, what do you tell somebody who, like Rich, who's like, I want a podcast, I know I can, but sometimes I struggle with what to say? What would you tell that person?
Yeah, I'm just spitballing here on that particular industry. So again, it comes down to pillars. I think if you can diverge yourself into different pillars, I think that industry news would be one of those pillars. And so that could be stuff that's happening at a conference, looking through the conference speakers and seeing what their topics are. If you've got an industry trade publication, or more likely this day and age, a digital publication, looking at articles there and not ripping off that content, but using that to go, oh, this is a good topic. What's my take on this topic? And then generating unique content out of those. That's a wealth of content ideas right there. But I would also look at within your industry, if you're looking at those, like the printing on cups or pens or those sorts of things, if I'm understanding it right, how are people using those products, and how's the end product getting into the hands of people? How are they selling it to people, or what's the technology looking like? So that's an industry, and from my point of view, that has changed dramatically over the last 10 years. Like, I remember when we first started the Fringe podcast, we had a Cafe Press store. We'd have to send things off to Cafe Press and get our custom logo on there. And of course they would drop ship it for us and stuff like that. But it seems like over the last few years, that technology has become much more accessible and is available in a whole lot of different products now. And so what is the technology and how are people utilizing that? I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing.
Yeah, I think that's great.
I would think of.
I would, like I said, recommend your guide for anybody who has those questions or trying to figure out like what to talk about. Because having those 4 pillars helps you really start thinking about, okay, I do have content for this. Oh, maybe a little light on this. Maybe I need to do some research on that to fill out that pillar a little bit more.
Yep.
So I think that's a great thing. So make sure once again to check out that guide. Now I just, discoverability is huge for podcasting, like trying to get your show found and listened to. It's not as easy as it used to be. I'm sure that, having it tied to Stranger Things or Fringe or whatever, having a show that's out in public's a little bit easier. But what's your actual launch strategy to stand out from like the sea of sameness, all these podcasts coming out every day? What do you recommend for people to stand out in their launch strategy?
Well, the first thing I say is your launch strategy is not going to make or break you. I know that you're a Disney fan, and so you might know that the first day that Disneyland opened, it was a disaster. The toilets worked,
right,
but the water fountains did not. They had to make a decision. There was a plumber strike, and they had to make a decision: do we have working toilets or working water fountains? And Walt wisely chose working toilets. There were fraudulent tickets. People were jumping over the fence, and so they had 3 times the people in the park that they had capacity or food for. So they ran out of food. Rides broke down. The asphalt had been poured the night before, and women's shoes the heels were sticking down into because of the heat. It was over 100 degrees. It was they called it Black Sunday. It was such a disaster.
Right.
I think Disneyland was able to do okay after that. I was there last year, and it was still doing pretty well. So your launch strategy, even if it's a disaster, is not going to make or break you. If it is a disaster, what can you learn from it? How can you improve? How can you communicate better your systems and so forth? So don't stress out about the launch. That's my number one tip. A lot of people think that if I don't get a good launch, then I'm sunk, and that's just not the case. Consistent quality content over time is going to be the thing that makes or breaks your podcast. So focus on the content first, be consistent with delivering that content. And I mean consistent. Every Thursday at 3 a.m., for example, my episode comes out.
Right.
And so people are going to work you into the rhythm of their lives. We all have a rhythm to our life. We get up at so-and-so, we make coffee, we eat breakfast, we take a shower, we can make the commute. We do spreadsheets all day, and while we're doing those, we listen to our podcast, whatever it is. Like, they have their dedicated time they're listening to podcasts, and they're going to work you or someone else into that time.
Right.
And if you can be consistent, then they're going to consistently, work you into that rhythm. So I don't think that people should stress over launch.
Got it. Speaking of people who probably should take a shower, we've got Lou popping in going, Fringe. He came in late. I'll give him. We talked about you already, Lou, saying how much that you won the contest because you knew the Fringe theme song, because he is a big fan. We kind of talked about this a little bit, but I want to kind of go over it because we did go into community a little bit. Stranger Things is going to wrap up this year. It's going to be done. What happens to the community, more importantly, that you've built for it? You've got fans, you've got people super passionate about it. Do you have an exit strategy? Are you going to try to maybe do a rewatch party after it finally wraps? What are you hate to build a community, and the people are invested in you. They like you. That's why they show up every week to hear you talk about this thing. How can you keep that community going and not abandon them once the show is over? I mean, and this doesn't have to do with media podcasts. A lot of times you'll have different seasons even for a business podcast. We're not going to be talking about this anymore. Or this company, if we're talking about Microsoft Front Page, most people don't use that anymore. So, how do you keep that community going, or do you say sayonara? I'm really interested in that.
Well, ultimately, it's what are your long-term plans or desires? If you are ending your podcast and you have no future plans, then you owe it to your audience to, regardless of what your future plans are, you owe it to your audience to communicate that to them. Hey, we're taking a seasonal break for the summer. We'll be back in September, and make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter so that you can, because you should be capturing email addresses, by the way, and emailing your audience and letting them know often, every week. But in this example, making sure they're a part of your email list so that you can email them to let them know when you're back on the air. If you're in my situation where, Fringe is over, what are we doing next? Like I said, we tried to transition our audience by starting the next podcast before Fringe wrapped, and we had mixed results with that. In terms of a sayonara party or something like that, that can be a thing to do. We did that with Fringe, in fact. We knew ahead of time when the show was going to wrap, and so it was in mid-January of 2013. And so we put together a finale party here at our convention center. We invited people to come and join us, and we had about 50 people fly in from around the U.S. and Canada, and we watched the finale together. We did a live podcast right after it was over. We had about 1,000 people, or maybe 800 people, join us for that live podcast, and it was a great event. We all kind of said goodbye to the show together, and it was wonderful. And so I think there are circumstances that might arise where that could be appropriate or meaningful for a non-TV show related podcast. But it all goes back to that community that you've built and the connections you've made. But, if you're shifting gears into a different podcast, it all comes down to communication and letting your audience know, here's the new podcast, here's where you can find us, and so forth, if you expect to have some carryover.
Yeah. I know, and he's going to get a big head, and he probably won't be able to fit the door out of his basement. But Lou does a great job with this. In fact, he did a watch party at one time. I can't remember what was it for. It was a new Marvel show, but we all watched it together in his community and talked about it. It was so much fun. Those kind of things. It may have been the WandaVision. I'm not sure, but it was doing those kind of things, having those watch parties, and activating your community. I think it's super.
You mentioned we did the escape room and the trivia night.
Yeah.
Those types of things. I know Lou has gotten together and joined me at the park for dinner at this restaurant, or different things with his community. Those are types of things that are available to any podcaster. Having an in-person meetup for any reason whatsoever to do an activity together. Maybe you've got a day training that you want to do or something like that. Those are some things that any podcaster can be tapping into to build that community.
Yeah, it was Moon Knight. That's right. Lou told me. Yeah, it was Moon Knight that we watched it for. That was fun. He does, and he has a great comment. He goes, people come for the content, i.e. Stranger Things, Jeff's beard, but they also stay for the people, the host and other members in conversations. That's what I love. Like when we do this show, when people like Gretchen and other people in the comments, when they're talking back and forth to each other, Dustin says, hey, I need those kind of promotional products. Let me know, Rich, and that kind of stuff. I think that is the coolest thing ever, having your community just like take care of each other inside of the chat or whatever. As we move on this next section, we only got a couple minutes left, but I've got to cover some of this stuff. I want to know from you guys, what is one production skill or tool you wish that you could instantly master? Would it be editing? Would it be mixing? Would it be sound design? Or would it be something else? What would you love to like snap your fingers and be really good at when it comes to those type of production skills? I would love to know. Let us know down below. But I wanted to talk a little bit about length, because like the Fringe podcast, the one I was kind of looking at, and I've kind of tasted some of your content, dipping into it. Some of it runs over 2 hours. Like they're not short podcasts, right? So how do you decide what the right length is for your podcast compared to different audiences? Because I know you probably get this question a lot. Like, how long should my podcast be?
Yeah, I love Dave Jackson's answer on this, and that is as long as it needs to be and not a minute longer. And if that's 20 minutes or 10, great. If it's 3 hours, fine. As long as the content is good. But ask your audience, our episode length is the way that it is because we just talk a lot. There were 4 of us initially with the Fringe podcast, and it takes some time to give everybody an opportunity to share their opinion on the show. And we had all these segments, and then we had listener feedback. And we started getting in so much listener feedback because everyone wants to share their theory or their favorite moments. This is water cooler stuff, right? And so everyone wants to have their turn to talk at the water cooler. And I remember this is, again, 2008, 2009, and data was a lot different back in those days. Cellular speeds were a lot different in those days, and podcast apps handled the content a lot different in those days. But the audience started telling us, hey, these episodes are too long. Can you break it in half? We want all the content, but can you break it in half? So we did. We had 2 episodes a week. We recorded them back to back, but had a nice little natural split. We recorded them as 2 separate episodes. And so that was really insightful. Like, okay, an hour and 40 minutes or so is what they wanted for a length. When we started the Fringe podcast rewatch. And so that hour and 40 kind of became our threshold of where content would be, even as everything else advanced, cellular speeds and data plans and technology, all that stuff advanced. So when we started the Fringe podcast rewatch, our podcast episodes were going over 2 hours, as you said. And I said to the audience, I was uncomfortable with it. And I said to the audience, are these episodes too long? Do we need to cut these into 2 episodes again like we did back in the old day? And they resoundingly said, no, keep it. And that's just a sign of the times having changed. Right. And if you go into your Apple Podcasts dashboard and you look at your episodes, they will show you what your consumption rate is. How long are people listening before they trail off? And ours are consistently 90% consumption. So they're liking the longer. And that's another tool that you can use. Like, are people, you might ask them, and I encourage you to do that, but you're not going to get an answer from a lot of people, maybe 5% of your audience.
Right.
But everybody is communicating through how long they're listening. And Apple's dashboard only includes the Apple ecosystem, but it should be enough to give you an educated idea whether people are actually consuming or where they're trailing off in your podcast.
Awesome. I do have one more question, but I got to pull up this one from Lou. He goes, P.S. I'm thinking about starting a late night fall asleep Fringe rewatch. Just subscribe to the podcast so I can listen alongside the rewatch.
Seahorse. Love it. Yeah. Love it. See, that's a true Fringy. Hashtag Seahorse. Yeah. Love it.
So he is a true Fringe nerd. But I wanted to talk a little bit about your, we haven't mentioned it yet. You have the Fifth Dimension, Entering the Fifth Dimension. It's a podcast about the Twilight Zone. And because I nerd out about sound design. And if you haven't caught it throughout the show, Darrell has talked about quality and that people on his podcast network have to have a certain quality and all that kind of stuff. His shows are very, very high quality. His intros are great. If you listen to any of his shows, you'll just know the amount of time and love that he's put into these. But I was really impressed with the intro for this Rod Sterling style intro that you have talking about your podcast. It sounds like him. It's kind of uncanny. So I wanted to know, and you told me to make sure to ask this question. Did you use AI for that voice work, or was it a traditional production, or how did you pull that off? Because it sounded really, really good.
Thank you for that. I really wanted you to ask this question because nobody asks me about that. Okay, so you're a bit of a Disney nerd. What's your favorite ride at the Orlando parks?
Oh, favorite? It's hard to tell. I mean, like there's classic ones. I mean, I love the Haunted Mansion is one of my favorites because it's a classic one. So,
okay. What about Hollywood Studios? Do you have a favorite ride there?
Oh gosh. I mean, I love Rise of the Resistance. That's kind of my favorite one.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. So my favorite ride is also Haunted Mansion, but my favorite ride at Hollywood Studios is the Twilight Zone Tower.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And if you go on that ride, the pre-show is a video from Rod, and then you hear Rod's voice throughout the show or the ride. You'll see Rod, but you will never actually hear the voice of Rod Serling at any point throughout that ride. Are you aware of this?
I knew that they did some super magic to make that happen. Yeah.
Yeah, they reached out to a voice actor by the name of Mark Silverman and got the approval from the Serling family. And so he is now the de facto voice of Rod Serling. When they had the anniversary last year, he was invited out to be a participant in that. He's Serling family. Knowing this, this is several years ago, maybe 2016. It was 2016. I had a friend who was a voice in the voice acting space, and I reached out to her and I said, "Do you happen to have a connection to Mark Silverman?" And she says, "As a matter of fact, I do." And so she connected us. And I said, "Mark, I'm starting this. You don't know me. I'm friends with this person. And I'm starting a podcast about the Twilight Zone. And I'm wondering if I could hire you to be the voiceover for the intro and outro." And he said, "Maybe. You'll need to go through my agent." Okay. So I went through the agent. He gave me that contact information. And the agent said, "Send me the script." And I did. And he said, "How are you using this?" And I told him how I was using it. And he said, "Okay, here's the price." And it was a lot. I mean, it was. And so I came back to Mark and I said, "Mark, I am so sorry. I am embarrassed. I have wasted your time. I expected it to be a premium rate. It's way beyond my budget. I appreciate you. I thank you for being kind. I'm embarrassed." And he said, "Well, what did my agent tell you?" And I told him the price. And he says, "Send me the script." So I sent him the script and he's like, "Oh, I love this. You've done some great things here. How about this price?" And it was a fraction of what the agent had said. And I'm like, "Yeah, that is well within my budget." And so, he did it.
Cool. That is such a good story. Yeah. That is so cool. So it reminds me again, and we talked about this at Lou Mangiolo's Momentum, who I just went there. Once again, his head's going to get so big. I know. But we talked a lot about this is so many of the presenters there talked about tenacity. It's just asking and then following up. Like the cake bake lady used to show up with a cake and says, "Hey, I have a cake here for Steve Martin and Martin Short," and just walked backstage and gave it to him. And like nobody questioned her.
Story about her. That's amazing. Yeah.
And so but you would see this theme through the presenters who have really gone through and seized opportunities. And one of the things is just asking and just doing. And I love that story because that's exactly what you did. And it shows in that the podcast intro. It is just, if you guys aren't into Twilight Zone, just go listen to the intro because it is very, very cool. I love it. Last question for you. I know you got a second. I can kind of wrap things up. Okay. So what advice would you give creators who want to add more production polish, like music effects, like an intro, like you've done with the Twilight Zone, without getting overwhelmed with editing? What would you tell people who want to take their show maybe to the next level, or they've done it for a while and they're like, "Listen, it's getting stale. I need to kind of boost it up another level"?
Well, hire it out. That's what guys like us are around for, is to really help those folks who need production help, either from time or from a quality standpoint. That's why we're here. Now, I understand that there are a variety of reasons why that's not available for everyone. There are other resources that are out there too. Fiverr, you can have some good success with, although there's some copyright issues sometimes with that too. So I would just also caution with that. In terms of production too, like I use a Rodecaster now, like for my, we still do the Fringe Podcast Rewatch as a live show. And so like you're doing here, where you're coming in and out with different audio and video techniques, and you're probably using a Stream Deck or Elgato's software for that. Those are great tools. My Rodecaster has sound pads where when it comes to time to do the fringe binge, I hit the little bumper cue for that, and it plays it for the live audience. And so if you do that right, then you don't have, it'll reduce your editing time as well, because it's already, baked into the live production. Although I still record multi-track, so I have that.
That's what I do.
That sweet editing ability to tweak it on the back end. But when I started, it was a mixer and wires going everywhere, some going in and out of the board and then back into the board for different effects, and then auxiliary outputs so that people can hear it on the live stream. And now it's a USB cable, and it's a very small footprint on your desk. And so those tools are really great. The Descript is also a great tool for editing. Riverside has some auto editing tools built into it as well. And from an AI point of view, I use AI for a lot of my written content. And so I recommend a tool called Magi for that. Dustin's head's going to get big now, but
I know
Magi.co is a great AI. There you go. Yeah.
Magi.co/Jeff. Save some money.
Yep.
So Darrell, this has been fabulous. I could nerd out and talk to you all day, but I want to give this last kind of time for you. Tell people where they can find you, your download that you have, all the stuff that is Darrell Darnell.
Yeah, you've given some great links throughout, and I appreciate that. ProPodcastSolutions.com there on the screen is where you can find our production company. We'll help you launch your podcast or take over the editing and production of your podcast, both audio or video. GoldenSpiralMedia.com is the website for all my nerdery stuff. Stranger Things, Twilight Zone, Stuff I Learned Yesterday, and Fringe are the four that are currently active over there at GoldenSpiralMedia.com.
Yeah, and don't forget Darrell's giveaway that you can find out at ProPodcastSolutions.com/creator. We've talked about it a couple times, but it is a great resource. Go check that out. And don't forget, my friends, we talked about community and live streaming and all this stuff. You can find out more about Ecamm, which is what we use to produce this show. We go live with, and it does multi-track, which is amazing. So I have all this opportunity to repurpose all this stuff, which for this show, I want to have a ton of content because it's been so good. You can find out more about that at ecamm.com/Jeff. You can use code Jeff15 to save 15% on your first purchase. And with that, folks, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you to Lou and Gretchen and Rich and Dustin and everybody who showed up, asked questions, Jim Fuse as well. Thank you guys so much for today. We appreciate you. And with that, we'll see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.